Ron, welcome, Lindsay Fleay.
G'day.
It's really, really nice to meet you.
Oh, thanks.
I think you're the only person I've met with an IMDb page.
An IMDb page? Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, guess I've lingered long enough around there.
Do you have to set that up yourself?
No. That was actually a byproduct of when I worked at a place called Animal Logic.
Animal Logic?
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that?
Okay, so it's a AAA studio. It does movies these days, like Peter Rabbit and the Lego Movie and Lego Batman. And previously, when I worked there in the 90s to the mid-noughties, I worked on films like Moulin Rouge, Happy Feet, The Matrix, a couple of other things. We kind of, I think when I first joined them in Christmas 93, I think, there was only like 13 odd people there. I was like the 13th or 14th person there.
Wow.
And back then they were just doing commercials, high-end or AAA end commercials. And,
AAA, so like the only thing that sort of rings a bell with is like security is like AAA versus AA. So AAA is like high quality.
AAA is, if you're talking about AAA in games, it makes sense. So if you can imagine, if you can, it must be very difficult in the 21st century to do this, to imagine a AAA TV commercial.
Right.
Now, this is back in the days when television was king, still, just, back in the 90s. So Channel 9 would have been run by a guy called Kerry Packer, who was a bit like a Rupert Murdoch, if you like.
Yeah.
Except
the Crown. The Crown guy. Yeah.
No, his dad.
His dad, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
And he inherited all that from an even more gnarly person called Frank Packer, I think. Anyway, Kerry Packer was the sort of guy that would, run Channel 9. He was really big on, ruled by fear, really. Managed like that old-fashioned style of management. But a lot of that ockerism and that sort of Paul Hogan-style humour was part of that. The worldwide of sports and that whole Channel 9 thing was his doing, really. He basically reinvented cricket when I was in primary school.
Yeah, I heard it. There was like a bit of a I don't know if it's a rumor or if it's an actual thing, but he actually went around and like started poaching all the people from the cricket to go over to his own channel or something like that.
Well, it wasn't his own channel; it was his own network.
Wow. Okay.
So whenever he spoke, the entire country would flinch basically because he had such a power. So television back then, some of the commercials that we worked on could command budgets of up to $500,000, and that took about 9 months to produce. And so Animal Logic was definitely aiming for the stars at the time and eventually trying to make the transition to movies.
Yeah, wow. Okay, I might just...
Oh, right, sorry.
Close to your face.
Am I clipping?
Okay. Yeah, no, all good. Not clipping.
I worked on that for the 90s, and then in the process of transitioning to movies, we worked on quite a few films, but being the sort of service agent to the service agent to the service agent when we first started out, a lot of the time we'd get uncredited, or only like 6 people would be allowed to have name credits, and there'd be like 20 of us working on it.
So you've worked on a few movies and stuff that you haven't actually been credited for.
I think oh God, I can't even remember what they are now. I doubt you'd be very minor.
Oh, okay.
But I remember the third film I worked on was The Matrix, and it was like one of these situations like, if my name doesn't get in the credits again, I'm going to frickin' leave. And so they had a policy where they set up an IMDb account for all the employees. So you can credit all the... Okay, right. And back in the days when IMDb was quite potent and still is, and that's because they look after themselves, I guess.
Wow. So I think that's one of like the main topics I was keen to have a discussion with you about is The Matrix. How does somebody like yourself get sort of asked to be involved in something like that?
Well, when I got into high-end production, it was like, it was really, I got into, where do I start? I got into 3D graphics and animation in the late 80s, and I got into it via the first multimedia machine, really, which was the Amiga, so like a home computer, 16-bit. I guess you could say it was like a little toy Unix system. So it was like a kind of little cozy domestic version of the big mainframes that they were doing this sort of stuff on. So that's where I learned most of my IT, I guess, and my computer software on that. So the first system I worked on was a homemade 3D system called Sculpt 3D.
Sculpt 3D. For some reason, I've heard of that.
You might have. Yeah. It's famous for having the juggler animation.
Oh, okay. Right.
So if you've ever seen that, it's a whole pre-Pixar universe ago, so no one knows about it anymore, I guess. And so I trained up on that for the better part of 5 to 10 years. And at the same time, I was also trying to make my own films. And, at the time, I was like a species of one in Perth. There didn't seem to be anyone anywhere that was doing anything even remotely like what I was interested into. So I had to kind of make it myself. And half the reason why the Magic Portal is Lego. So I need to work out how to make this with one person, me. And in the end, I got a collaborator, a wonderful guy called Thomas Kaiser, who did a lot of the sound effects and sound work on the Magic Portal.
Wow. So I've read obviously about the Magic Portal. This was before like actual Lego characters were like a thing, right?
The minifigs have been around since the early 70s.
Oh, okay,
so,
right.
Or something like that. But
because I was doing some reading, that you actually created your own characters.
Yeah, well, what I did, I scratched off the faces and just used rotring ink pens and painted new expressions. And then I did the same with the little characters and put little coloured letters on them. So the joke is a learner and a probationary and then the captain. It was just like I need to make a film on my own, and what the hell do I need? And I realised I needed a whole crew, and I don't have a whole crew, so I had to kind of
do it all yourself in a way.
Pretty much do it. And the thing about Lego is that it's all knobs on board, so I can time it out and break it all down, and it's made a lot simpler.
Yeah, so like back when that was made, which was
between 85 and 89.
Right. Okay. So before then, they was the only means by which to do animation was sort of like stop start camera stuff.
So everything was wet film. No one used video.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get a video split, but that was like, ooh, Steven Spielberg land, that was.
Right.
And that was when most of the stuff that we now take for granted, thanks to your graphic cards and all that stuff, most of that stuff was strictly the domain of big Hollywood. Right, so the idea that you might make a little film would mean, we've got a little setup like we have in the studio. We've got a camera, we've got a tripod, got some lights, and that's the extent of it. If you want to do anything else, you'd go off to the local lab who would be developing your film every night, and then you'd be watching the rushes the next morning.
Wow.
And they'd probably do some titles for you and maybe some cross dissolves or something like that. And that was the extent of it. Yeah,
so I'm keen to get into sort of like a bit of the background of how you developed the story for the Lego film.
Okay, well.
And so before you start, do you reckon you could pull up the Magic Portal for us, Leo, and we can watch it, and maybe we can have a chat about it when it's playing.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully we don't get copyright claimed.
Well, actually, speaking of copyright, weren't you sent a cease and desist letter?
Oh, okay. So this is the old Lego we're talking about. We're talking about pre-digital Lego.
Yeah.
So pre-digital Lego was very defensive, and they'd been pretty much in legal Lego litigation since day one.
Yeah.
Because there were all these rivals trying to kind of muscle in on their very genius product. And so they were forever fighting off rivals and clones and stuff like that. And really, there wasn't a Lego film like this. Is what I'm told this is sort of the first brick film. Apparently, I beat a Star Wars fan film by about 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, about 1998 or something. I had a bunch of guys contact me by email. Hey, when did you put your film out? Was it 1988?
Trying to claim that they were the first people to do it.
It was that was
Lindsay,
1989.
This shot right here is so Star Wars. You so stole that from A New Hope.
No, actually, that's actually the Nostromo.
Could you turn down the volume on this a bit?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, just a bit.
That's not Star Wars. That's the Nostromo. You fool.
Yes. So
Alien, not Star Wars.
We're taking individual photos of every single movement.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing about the Lego stuff here is that I had to take the whole roof off just to take a shot.
Wow.
So what you're seeing here is the entire set gets rebuilt and then built down, and I'd take 1 or 2 frames, depending on how fast the scene was. Then I'd have to brick it back up. So I had to design the whole set so it was made out of big modular chunks so I could just plunk these things down.
We get to catch a glimpse of that in the end.
Yeah, you'll see it all through it. So part of my restoration is thinking, I could paint all that out, but I'm not sure I want to do a George Lucas on it.
So what would be the process to remaster it? Would it just be do with colour and all that sort of thing?
First, the primary thing was to just scan the whole thing at high resolution, ridiculous high resolution, so I can scale it down. And what you realise with 16mm film, old-fashioned wet chemical film, is that it's really pointillism. I had all these people saying, "Oh, yeah, get rid of the grain." Like, no. If I take rid of the grain, there's nothing left.
Yeah,
it's like one of those old. It's literally grain because it's chunks of chemical emulsion on plastic in layers, one for each colour, each dye, which you then process individually, and they all react differently. So your blue layer is made out of gravel, but your green layer is a bit nicer, and the red layer is kind of smoothest of all. And just going through it at 16mm, you realise, that's really not much space, and you got all this. It's made out of sand basically, and it's just shimmering. So you see this detail, and a lot of it's made up in your head, really, when you're watching it. So if you take it all out, it suddenly looks like some really bad bit of Barbie doll synthetic vision of some kind. It just loses all its charm. So it's a balancing act. So I went off and foolishly bought myself a copy of Nuke for I think I sold an arm and a leg.
Nuke. Can you explain what Nuke is?
Nuke is a AAA compositing package.
Right, okay.
It's what we might call a node-based compositor.
It's
right,
AAA, but no one knows what it is.
Okay, well, that's because it's not on the domestic market. It's essentially, it's the big Hollywood end of, or big series end of compositing. And so it's one of those programs that works only in 32-bit floating point. Right, so big file formats. It doesn't even think in terms of image. It thinks in terms of data. So here's my data coming in. I'm going to do stuff to it, send it out again. And that's,
which is why like 3D design and stuff nowadays, it requires so much processing power, right? Because they're such large file sizes. Yeah. Is that correct?
That's pretty much it. And so one of the perks we had when we were making those old ads, is that we only had a resolution of 720 by 576 pixels.
Which is 720p, right?
No, it's 576p.
Oh, wow. Okay, even less.
Actually, no, it's probably 576i because it's interlaced.
Wow, okay. So very low resolution.
That's old analog video. It's actually 50 interlaced fields making 25 frames. So when it plays, you get that wedding video smoothness. And then when you freeze it, it kind of sits there and shimmers in front of you because you've got 2 half frames twitching between each other. It's just the way video was designed. So this is old analog transmission video. So in a sense, it did its own anti-aliasing for you by looking like you were looking through a moldy fish tank or something. You just can't see anything through the plaque.
If that's the case, then how do they upscale old 70s movies to Blu-ray?
Well, they were all shot on 35mm.
Oh, right.
So if you see some of those old TV shows that they've resurrected, like the original Star Trek series or the I Loves, they've basically gone back to the original negative. Because a lot of that stuff would have been shot on 35mm film.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Whereas if you look at some of the old BBC Doctor Who stuff and all that stuff, half of it's shot in studio cameras and half of it's shot on 16mm on location. That's why you got such widely different looks.
Sort of perspectives on different shots and stuff.
If any of you have seen some of the old goodies or the old Benny Hill stuff, they'll have the studio stuff and then they'll switch to the outdoor stuff and it looks completely different.
What do you views on sort of like the shift to digital film versus film, actual traditional film?
I get nostalgic about the old analog methods until I remember, oh yeah, that's right. Trying to make anything was a fucking pain in the neck. There was some nice things about it. Like if you're doing live action, I think I'd get a bit more wistful about it. But certainly with animation and visual effects, I certainly don't. It's one of those things where the amount I can do now as a small group or myself is vastly, hugely bigger than what I could do before. One of the things that, I don't know if you'd know about this, but if I was working in the 80s, say on a little stop motion film or something like that, and I was talking to my peers at the time, getting 5% of your vision down on the final product was considered pretty good.
5%?
Oh, 10 if you're lucky.
Wow, okay.
Right? If you wanted to get like 15 or 20, you'd go off to Hollywood.
Yeah, to actually get like really
so
a
when
lot
you
of money
see
pumped
characters,
into it.
so I totally get why characters like George Lucas will say, oh, it is not the film I wanted to make. I wanted to do this. And he goes off and turns it into a CGI playpen for 4-year-olds. And because that's really what he had kicking around in his head, but he had to compromise and do this and kludge that and blah, blah, blah. And as far as I'm concerned, well, that's the film.
Yeah, so like that's it's interesting you bring that up because for somebody who's not very educated in film and everything, you like, okay, somebody writes it, somebody directs it, and that's about it, right? But when you're a director, you actually lose a lot of creative control once it goes down the line.
It's a collaborative effort. You're like the captain of the ship, and you're saying we're going in that direction and we're exploring. And then you kind of explore where you want to go. You had a rough idea of where you're going, so you think, okay, we're going to go over there. It's a film about little characters on a Lego film. They go into a magic portal. They go into another Lego world, and they keep going into Lego portals. And every time they go into one, they get closer and closer to the real world.
Wow!
Right? It goes from Lego to plasticine to real world.
Wow!
And that's the basic theme. I don't really know what the fuck I was doing.
Yeah.
But that's it. And so I'm sitting down working it out. And so the look and feel of the thing was a byproduct of me building it. So in a sense, you discover it as much as you invent it.
Whereas as you're going, you
that's right.
Yeah, okay.
So in the digital world, like the first stupid idea you can think of is the one that gets there.
Right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the analog world, you really had to think long and hard.
And plan stuff out really well.
And realize I'm only going to get 5 to 10% of the way there. So what's the best way I can get the most mileage out of this little thing here. And that eventually becomes a look and feel in and of itself.
Wow.
Right? So we didn't, it's like you look at all the old 80s horror films, body horror and all that kind of, they
That
didn't sit there and think,
stuff.
they didn't invent that look. That look was a byproduct of the fact that they were trying for something else.
Wow,
and it
okay.
became a thing. So when people get nostalgic about that stuff and they get upset at the new remake of The Thing, it's not like the old Carpenter films, like, well, no, they were busy trying to not make the audience laugh at them.
Yeah, wow. It's funny you bring up The Thing. That I actually watched it. I think Leo and I were discussing it, and I had never seen it before until like a few weeks ago. It was absolutely. What year did that come out? Like late 80s or something?
82, I think.
Yeah, I think
81. It's an early 80s film. It's the last of the midnight genre flicks before E.T. killed everything off and it sort of became the 80s party zone.
I haven't actually seen it yet. The original John Carpenter.
I won't spoil it.
I already know the spoilers. It's fine.
No. This is what I discovered when I used to do screenings with my students. They've seen all the memes, they've seen all the bits, but they've never sat down in a dark room for 2 hours uninterrupted. No phones, no sliders, no banner ads, no pop-ups, no freaking whatever. In a dark room, just them, their imagination, their little dream state, and you go and show them something like Alien for the first time. And it was great. As
I haven't
a
seen
lecturer.
Alien either.
Oh,
I've
seen
seen
so
it.
Good, man.
I've seen it I've seen it at least a dozen times. But it was like I was back in the 70s watching it for the first time because the entire audience of my little students were, late teens, early 20s.
The up-and-comers.
They were all freaking out in all the right places. Like, John Hurt goes and sticks his head in an egg and the whole room's like, you can hear this go dead quiet. Like,
wow.
You just wait for the tension and suddenly it's all over Red Rover. And so, oh my God, it's like I haven't seen the film before. I've got an audience in here that's reacting with it. And that's the thing with you missing this thing. Well, you could argue that with VFX, but the whole streaming thing and the reason why characters like Martin Scorsese get upset is that you're missing the whole theatrical experience. I think the last big theatrical experience I distinctly remember was Luke discovering Darth was his dad.
Star Wars back in the day.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow,
So this would have been.
surely.
So
But that, I mean, like,
there's been others, but that's the Everest
absolute
book.
pinnacle.
So the second sequel came out. So no one's thinking franchises at this point, and the whole audience is packed in there. This would be, and so the first run, so they don't know what's coming. This is the old City Arcade, which is where Carillion lives now. There used to be a big Hoyt cinema there in the early 70s to the late 70s, early 80s, before they Carillioned it. And it was a big Cinerama screen, this kind of almost Omnimax style 45-degree seating with this gigantically ultra-curved screen for old Ben-Hur films or something. And, of course, they couldn't sustain that sort of thing, so it's all folded up and died, so they redeveloped it all in the 80s. But anyway, got a packed cinema full of this stuff. And the first thing that happens is, like, they're doing their lightsaber duel and everyone's going, oh my God, the sequel is better than the original. Wow, this is amazing. That doesn't, because sequels don't do that normally. Jaws certainly
They're
didn't.
usually a lot worse.
Superman kind of did. The Godfather certainly did. And that's like you count these films on one hand. It's like, oh man, Star Wars, they actually topped it. I don't believe it. So
why do you reckon that there's that like an expectation for sequels to be worse than the originals?
that's because they're franchises made by real estate agents.
Okay.
Real estate agents.
Okay.
And real estate agents only like things that have worked in the past.
Right.
That's why it's very interesting listening to my nephew a couple of years ago saying, oh yeah, I know Star Wars films. You know those films that have Death Stars in them? And it's like, oh yeah, that's a Star Wars film.
Yeah.
They all have Death Stars in them because every single one is a nostalgia trip. So, but the thing is, I'm in a darkened room with Luke discovering the hard way who his dad is. And we're in this whole packed room and they have this, classic serial melodrama acting out in space. And then Luke gets his hand lopped off.
Which was pretty graphic.
It was incredible.
Watching that for the
And
first time.
every girl in the audience shrieks, oh, Luke, oh no. It's like, and we're all going, ooh, can you do that to the hero? He's got top billing. What the hell?
Top billing.
It's like, you don't do that to the heroes. He's just lost his hand. He's like sitting there. It's like, oh, fuck, that was his lightsaber hand. Oh no, what are we going to do? And then Darth Vader hits it. And it's like, what? And like, there's like 600 people all going, what? At the same time. So that's the Everest of reactions like that. The only other one that would come close would be the cult Rocky Horror stuff. But that was well rehearsed.
Right.
People got into it for the good time and they knew what to do when and how. But with the Star Wars, it was spontaneous.
Yeah.
So when I think of films like The Thing, I'm in a room. I don't know what's going to happen next. There's no memes to guide me. And the paranoia in that film is so intense.
Yeah, that was sort of my experience watching it.
It's got nowhere to go except radiate into the audience. The other film that does that really well is the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers from the late 70s with Donald Sutherland in. You should watch.
Who directed that?
I'm not sure who directed that offhand.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
But it's fucking brilliant.
Let me
it's
look
really
this up.
good.
Invasion of the Body
look that up, Leo.
Late 70s Invasion of the Body Snatchers, definitely worth your while.
So
and
being
what
a
you
bit
want to
of
do is watch it in a dark room with a bunch of people, so you get a nice big group thing going. And then
so everybody's experiencing all the thrill themselves.
Yep. So that's how this stuff works. So that's the original you got up there. That's the 56 version.
Wow,
The
1956. Wow.
Yeah, that's the original. That's the Cold War version. You know, creeping communism and all that stuff.
The Cold War is just brewing up.
Seriously, that's what it is. It's a crude metaphor made by largely conservative filmmakers making...
Philip Kaufman.
That might be it. He's a bit of an old vet from way back. You'll probably recognise some of the images from it. I think the distinctive one is Donald Sutherland.
What is that? Go back, Leo. Yeah, on the right.
That one and Donald Sutherland doing his thing, which is actually a spoiler. But
wow, a young Donald Sutherland. You don't really...
What do you mean, a young Donald Sutherland? I still haven't got used to the idea he's an old Donald Sutherland.
So being from like a very analog sort of background, do you sort of get frustrated when you see movies like Fast and the Furious go to like number 9?
No, not really. They're no different. It's an old tradition. I mean... Have you ever heard of a series called the Carry On films?
No. Please explain.
Carry On Western, Carry On Nurse, Carry On Taxi?
No.
Look them up, Leo.
What are they?
You've obviously not watched Free to Air, have you?
Not religiously for a long time.
Have you heard of the Hammer films?
No.
Okay. Have you heard of a thing called James Bond?
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course.
Right. So that's, you could say, is a series. And then in somewhere around after the 80s, 90s, people started talking about franchises. And I guess the thing there you go.
Because it's such a popular method now to really franchise out movies.
You haven't seen a Carry On film?
What are these?
The hell?
What are these?
Read it and weep. Are you big fans of Benny Hill?
They're all from the
I know
50s.
Benny Hill, yeah.
Yes, we endure Benny Hill. Now imagine movie versions of that. British vaudeville.
Fuck, there's so many of them.
Oh, there's millions of them.
They come out every year. Look at this.
That's it.
Every year.
So the Poms were famous for their series. So they had the Hammer films, which started in about the late 50s, and they got the rights to the original Universal horror monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula. So that's where Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing got their start.
Wow.
And that's a whole treasure trove.
So the entire franchise method is really it's actually been baked in a long time ago.
Not quite. That was a series that worked really well. So, it's familiar. We're just churning them out. A franchise is something different. Franchise is where you got, say, Harry Potter, and the movies are just a part of it. And the novels are probably their progenitors, and then the games and the spin-offs and the series and the blah, blah, blahs. So if the film dies or the game blows up, it doesn't matter. The franchise lives on.
Will continue. Okay.
So the thing, I suppose the first pure one of those that got the whole model going in a big way would have been Pokemon.
Really?
Well, when Pokemon came out, no one could work out, this thing's really successful, but is it the TV show, the cartoon series?
Like there's so much going on with it.
The games? Or is it the merchandise? Which one of these things is driving this? And they couldn't work out what it was that was driving it other than the concept of Pokemon. So you found films were less about, you can see when we're studying, you might recall this, Leo, our promo or trailer assessment in diploma. You're right. So
don't give away any answers.
No.
To him.
I know he's
unethical.
So that's not what I'm looking for, really. So with the trailers, we know you can kind of see a change in the way trailers are put together.
Okay.
And so these days, trailers trade on familiarity. They trade on the fact that you're a Star Wars fan or a Star Trek fan. And it's like,
so they show all the big shit.
They show you all the spoilers and all that stuff because they know you're going to queue up around the block, even if as you're boycotting it, chuckle, that sort of thing.
You're completely right.
So it's all about familiarity and stuff because it's made by real estate agents that are desperate to get a return.
So what about my trailer?
Your trailer? I'm trying to remember your trailer.
It was a John Wick 3 trailer.
That's right.
It was a trap remix of Tequila. It was actually a complete rip-off of a trailer for Baby Driver. I took the trailer music.
It did look familiar.
Did you enjoy that movie, Baby Driver?
Yeah, I loved it. I saw
thought
that.
it was pretty good.
I saw that at
it
the
was
cinema.
pretty good, man.
There's actually some pretty good films coming out.
Yeah.
There's like
That's what I was going to say.
There was
Like,
a whole crop of Australian ones that turned up last year, and all these Australian audiences went out and saw them. It's like, thanks, COVID. Good work.
Oh, I saw the Suicide Squad last night.
Oh yeah.
a friend of mine saw that today, and he reckoned it was really, really good.
It's funny.
Yeah.
It's a really funny
Like after
movie.
the abysmal failure, the original or the first one that came out was. I remember seeing that being a little bit disappointed.
I didn't think that was a failure. I just thought, oh, that's pretty much up to par.
But the Suicide Squad.
It's a genre flick, and it's the MCU and all that stuff is the equivalent of what would be an old Western.
Okay.
And they churn those things out by the truckload. There are thousands and thousands of them. Like, one of the things I was thinking, I need to show an iconic Western to my students. And I'm thinking, God, which 400 of them should I pick? Because there's that many of them. So you look at the superhero genre now ruling the roost, but for about 4 decades, from 1920s...
It was all Western stuff.
It was all the Western.
Okay. Wow, I didn't know that.
Oh, it's completely. If you look at anything representing on a political cartoon or anything like that, the United States, it was invariably a Western.
Wow.
Some Ronald Reagan with his cowboy hat riding off next to the.
Because Reagan was an actor.
He was.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s, he was the president of the Actors Guild in the States when they had the House of Un-American Activities, and he was busy dobbing them all in.
What's your favorite Western, by the way?
That's a tricky one. I suppose arguably you could say Star Wars, but
come on.
No,
that's about as Western as it gets.
Well, yeah, that's
you're
it.
so Western, you're in another galaxy.
Now, Star Wars, you could say, would be the first of the Harry Potter films.
Yeah.
Right? It's a remix of everything that came before it, repackaged into a single entity. When they, so when they marketed it, it was marketed as, "Hey, kid," it was marketed to everyone from age 7 to 77, and the thing that they traded on was that it had all your favorite films on there. It had the biblical epics, it had the westerns, Han Solo, bar scene, shoot the guy dead.
Now that you mention Western, it is actually really, really Western influenced. Yeah,
then you've got.
I've never thought about it
the
like
Star
that.
Wars film. Sorry, what am I talking about? The World War II flick. So infiltrate Stalag 13 or whatever it is, and rescue the princess or the resistance leader, get them out, have a B-29 battle with some Messerschmitts on the way back from the Death Star, get back to the alien base, and then it turns into a James Bond film where they blow up the base at the end with a big climatic zap power bam battle in space. It's got a love triangle in it, right?
It's got everything.
It's got the old hero's journey. It's like it's even got Tarzan in it. Whoa, across the old bottomless pit.
True, no,
it's got it's got monsters, trash compactors. It's got the old. It was basically a riff on the old serial, the old Republic serials. Republic was a cheap, nasty film studio that churned out 25-minute, or 20-minute, or 30-minute episodic black and white films for the days when people just went out to the movies once a week and sat down in front of it like broadcast television. They'd have the newsreel, they'd have the Western, they'd have a serial, they'd have this and that.
Wow.
Right? So that's what Star Wars was riffing on. All those guys who were film students in the 70s and 60s coming into their own in the 80s were all reminiscing about their childhood and teenage years. With
all really feeling nostalgic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what that is. That's a sort of rehash of that.
I sort of feel like whenever I've really had like a pure emotional experience watching a movie, it's because for some reason the flick itself has made me feel every single possible emotion I possibly can. So you've been scared, you've laughed, but you've also been like so many different range of emotions. Yeah. I feel like one of the core things missing today versus like old school filmmaking is that a lot of filmmakers miss that. They really forget to put the viewer through everything. Probably
because a lot of old school filmmakers aren't really thinking about what they're doing in the sense that half of your film is the audience's response to it. I guess YouTubers find this out the hard way when things go sour and they get a little scandal that they didn't anticipate, whether it's some dude like PewDiePie saying something stupid and his 60 million followers all freak out at once, great crying out in the force, all that sort of nonsense because, these characters don't realize they're broadcasters.
They're being listened to and judged quite heavily.
That's right. This is a semi-professional thing, so it's all official. There's a reason why old media outlets had people like editors.
To make sure it's legit.
That's right, and all that stuff. So, it's not just, otherwise you're just an unpaid interior decorator from some Silicon Valley warlord basically trying to make a free buck off you. After all, it's free because you're the resource, really.
Yeah, and all the data in which you provide people is getting sold.
Getting back to that why do old school stuff do that? That's because they're talking to a particular audience. So it's sort of an ephemeral response, and movies have always been the sort of medium of dreams and nightmares. Really, that's what horror films were designed for. They're really designed around big audience reactions. If you want a great audience reaction, try your bucket list. Try and see Psycho on the big screen with an audience who hasn't seen it before.
Such a great movie, dude.
You can manage that.
Yeah.
You've had your film experience.
I watched it on Stan for the first time like a couple of months ago. But yeah, I reckon watching it in a legit cinema full of people would be fucking terrifying.
It's great stuff.
Yeah.
It's one of his best films.
One of the interesting things about that film is that they build, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it.
Well, it's only been around since the 1960s.
So if you haven't seen it, that's your fucking fault.
Yeah. I saw it in high school. And they remixed some of they re-released some of Hitchcock's films. So all us media students just dropped everything and watched about 4 or 5 of them in a row at what's now the Luna, back when it was the New Oxford.
Luna Theatre?
Yeah.
In Leederville?
In Leederville.
Yeah.
It used to be the New Oxford from many moons. So we watched Rear Window and North by Northwest and Psycho on the big screen. It was like, wow.
That would have been so cool.
That was amazing.
I think the only Hitchcock movie I've seen is Rope, because I heard that it was the first movie to
attempt a single shot. Yes.
Yeah. And I liked it. I like Rope.
Oh, sort of like the 1914.
Hitchcock was sort of, if Hitchcock was around now, he'd be Me Too'd out of existence, and entirely justifiable too. He's not the sort of guy you'd take to a picnic. But
there's some weird things about him.
What he did with films, it's brilliant to study, because he basically saved my bacon with The Magic Portal, because he essentially introduced me when I was doing my film studies at the time to film language. I'm saying something here. So I'm going to say
a message.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, no, just saying something. It's like literature or music or something. You're conveying something. With films, it's sort of like this kind of ephemeral, emotional thing. If it was a computer game, it's doing something.
Okay.
Right? So the whole point of a game is that agency. You're pushing it along.
You have the choice to make decisions.
If it's VR, it's experiential. Right? If it's radio, it's something else again. If it's reading, it's something else again. If it's, you know what I mean? It's all different. So once I got my head around that, I was like, the Magic Portal script almost fell into place. Now I've got a way of approaching it. I can sort it out. And at the same time, it gives me a means to solve all the problems, like how the hell am I going to make this thing? And what do I need to show? And when I realize, I don't need to show 99% of it. I can just show a little bit of it, and the audience will make the rest work.
Wow. Just to change the subject onto another one of your... from what I was reading, like you've had a pretty substantive career with some of the things you've worked on. Would be Lord of the Rings.
I did a month's worth of spillover work. So what happened there was the first Lord of the Ring films was coming out, and Animal Logic was working on a couple of things at the same time in Australia. And then we get the call saying, we can't get all the shots finished in time. So they farmed out stuff to various places they could trust.
Wow.
So for 1 month, we got to work on various odds.
So
leftover shots.
What role did you play in the production of that movie?
I worked on 2 shots in that one. Both of them involved Arwen on her little horse.
Oh, okay, right.
So Arwen, when Frodo gets stabbed in the shoulder by the ghouls or whatever it is, and he's getting poisoned and falling over, and then Liv Tyler trapezes out of the mist on her little white charger, and it's all this beautiful glowing raiment and stuff like that. So my job was to make the glowing raiment.
Wow. Okay.
So volumetric lighting.
Yeah.
But in the days before we had volumetric lighting.
Because that was like, when did that come out? 20 years ago or something?
Yeah.
So obviously you don't have access to anywhere near the level of capability that you do nowadays.
Oh, look, I think our archivist students at the TAFE would probably do this in an afternoon.
Really? Yeah. So back then it was actually quite a...
Volumetrics are just like, and what's more, you got a physics space render now. So all the bounce light's done for you. We had to settle that up by hand once upon a time. So
wow.
Anyway,
but back in the day.
So I had to set up this thing. So I had two shots. One is this close up of Liv Tyler emerging, looking very diaphanous through the fog or through the mist. And that's the second shot, which is there. And then the first shot was this beautiful lady coming through with a horse through the fog. So you see this blob of light emerge from behind the bushes and emerge. So it couldn't look like a lighthouse. It had to look like a presence. So you get to do all these visual effects, and they say, right, we want to see a presence, this, and this, and they don't use a single technical term. They're after a feeling and effect, and you have to sort of sit down and have a panic attack, and then work out how the hell am I going to make this. So off you go. I also had to disguise the fact that the person on the horse was the stunt double, who was wearing the wrong costume, had the wrong hairstyle, looked the wrong shape, and could actually ride a horse. Apparently, Liv Tyler couldn't. And
Wow.
I had to
So you had to fix that up.
I had to disguise the fact that I had to introduce Arwen on one shot without actually showing who she was.
Right.
And
it was a
that's
stunt
when my Legoland experience comes in. Like, okay, this is the old problem where I can't show this directly, but if I put two shots together,
Implicitly.
it's
Yeah.
implicit. So I don't
Okay.
have to try and be literal in the first one, because the second one's going to do all that work for me. I can just focus on, here is the emerging cut to Liv Tyler.
Wow.
It's that the first shot, second shot equals third meaning.
Okay, so you don't really give the audience what they're looking for in both those shots, but you put it in a way to build the subtext in a way that they can sort of figure it out in the third shot.
It's like,
right, okay.
I mean, I learned a lot of my filmmaking through Alfred Hitchcock and studying at Curtin University as the film course, which is still going, I believe. But I also picked up a lot of stuff off my granddad's Super 8 projector and a little editor, because he used to buy little Super 8 10-minute versions of movies and Charlie Chaplin films and cartoons and stuff, and we'd have little Super 8 movie nights every now and then, and the days before VHS, really.
Wow.
And so that was kind of good. But what it did allow me to do is pick up one of these little 8mm reels, feed it through a little editor, and go through it frame by frame. And he actually blew my little tiny mind when I was a 10-year-old when he went and bought a 30-minute version of Star Wars.
A 30-minute version.
Yeah, a really cut down version. So it starts off the first part of the film.
And it still was like a concise story.
It stops at the end of the Death Star escape, and most of it's missing. But I got to see the Death Star escape frame by frame, and that's when I suddenly realized, it's just mostly close-ups of people going, what?
Yeah,
What?
yeah.
And then cut to TIE Fighter flies outside. And you think, wait a minute, isn't Princess Leia inside a metal box?
Yeah,
What you looking at? And then I realized, why did that work? And then, screen direction. And then when I'm reading Hitchcock, it all fell into place. And that's how I built the whole film. So I built it in little pieces that when you put it together, the meaning is built in the audience. That sort of thing.
What's your favourite Hitchcock film?
Ooh, I think Psycho would have to be the one. And I guess the next one would be the follow-up, The Birds. But some of his early not-so-silent stuff was pretty fun too.
Who did The Shining?
That was Stanley
That was
Kubrick.
Kubrick.
That was Kubrick. Sorry, I'm thinking about the wrong person. But yeah, I was going to mention before about Psycho. I think one of the most differentiating factors of that for any movie that I've ever seen is that the woman at the beginning, he spends like 45 minutes to an hour sort of building her character, and then
In the minds of the audience.
yeah, in the minds of the audience, and then spoiler alert, like something happens to her, but it's like the only time I've ever seen a movie where he spends so much time focusing on one thing that isn't actually the end product.
Well, you think of what happened. That film came out in the 60s, right? During the height of the Hollywood era was just starting to decline. That is the old studio system, where it was run by the people that effectively set up Hollywood, and everything was regimented to a degree. And then television was kind of carving great strips of it at that point. So people's idea of just going off to the movies once a week to watch the serial, the newsreel, and all that stuff went out the window. And Hollywood had to steadily make films that people would actually want to go out and watch. Right, and they started making what they called the tentpole film, the big widescreen Ben-Hurs or the right, and that was designed. You can't do that on television. Look how big it is, big westerns, big biblical epics, big World War II film or whatever the hell it is, and that was how they got bums on seats. Wow! So they were frantically trying to keep it alive. Hitchcock had a whole TV persona that he was doing quite well with. Thank you very much. So Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So he had been cultivating this whole aura of an auteur filmmaker.
Wow. Okay.
And feeding into that myth. And so he had his character down pat. So, when he shot Psycho, it was with a TV crew.
Wow. So not like an actual movie production crew. They had like a TV background.
It was done through the studios, I believe.
Wow.
But I believe it was done through his TV crew.
Wow.
So they could churn it out pretty fast and quick and efficiently. So they did.
Wow.
And so when you think that film works, not because it's using fantastical cinematography or beautiful photography, it's the way it's assembled.
Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I guess the way it's been put together.
That's the why it's such a great guy to study, because I've got a tripod and I can get a close up here and a tripod shot there, and it's like, well, you can still make a film that works. You don't have to
depends
have
on the
all
construction of the
gadgetry.
storyline.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
That was the situation I was in. I had a situation when I was making the Lego film, and I couldn't move the camera at all because the whole set was built on a table with half the set missing. The camera butted up against the table because the camera was bigger than the set, right? And I had to kind of build everything right up to the lens, sandbag it all down with the heaviest tripod I could find.
How big was the set?
It was about the size of a dinner plate. Most of the time.
Dinner plate.
Some of the outdoor shots,
wow.
The chase sequence would be about as long as this table.
That's fucking tiny.
But it was a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, that would have been a nightmare.
Right? So I had to sit down and think, how the hell am I'm going to have to shoot all the shots from this angle first and then all the shots from that angle second. So that shots 1, 10, 15, 26, 193. Oh shit, continuity. And then go back and rearrange, destroy the set, rebuild it in another angle. So I'm pulling this thing apart, rebuilding it at a different angle thanks to the studs on the board with a different camera angle. Trying to and marking off all the shots. And so it was all pre-production to death because you can't make decisions like that on the field. You're just basically colouring in the pictures by that point.
Wow. Is this true that the set was so tiny that the lights you were using actually melted some of your
I had
things?
some crappy old photographic lights from my granddad.
Wow. And they get very hot.
Yeah, well, they were hot, but it was a confined area for hours on end. So I had fans up set up. But what happens is it doesn't so much physically melt, although I did leave a few fingerprints and bits of plastic. But the base plates would warp.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So the whole thing would kind of twist, which makes the restoration a bit tricky because I can't just I'll just stabilize this shot. It's a bit of a wobbly film thing and then realize the whole set's kind of flexing and changing over time. And not evenly either. So it's like, okay, I'll have to compromise this. So that was a bit of a headache. But getting back to it, because I had such a limited palette to work with, that is, I can't do big camera moves, or I can't do this, I can't do that. My set's tiny, my lights, or I can't mood light it. My camera didn't have a mechanical trigger on it, so I couldn't do timed exposures. The original plan was to light it with LEDs, like little tiny, so the whole thing was lit up like the Nostromo in Alien. It was super dark, but super razor sharp. Because they'd have a small little aperture, but a long exposure time, like a second or 2 seconds. So you get a really small aperture, so you get a really big depth of field. So it doesn't look like a Lego film anymore. It doesn't look like this, you get a tiny little photograph of an ant. You see its compound eyes are real sharp, but everything else is soup. I want it to be razor sharp all the way down.
Wow. A while back, I attempted writing my own movie script for a feature film, just as like a bit of a creative thing. Because I love film and I've always been a big fan. One of the biggest things I thought was really difficult was writing dialogue that actually sort of made sense.
It's shorthand usually.
Yeah, right, okay. Like the difficult, like obviously with directors and writers like Tarantino, so like really, really well known for his dialogue writing. What's your sort of method by which you like to write dialogue?
I'm not sure really. I think you're mostly showing, not telling. So that style of dialogue was never my thing. If you want to see beautiful dialogue done, go and watch any Coen Brothers film.
Coen Brothers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they do this whole rhythm thing. So when they're shooting their films and cutting it together, they cut on conversational rhythms. It's quite different.
Even The Big Lebowski, where it's mostly just swears.
Yeah.
That's such a fucking good movie though.
Yeah. It's like this. It's like they do it almost like music. And if you see someone else try and do a Coen Brothers script, it doesn't quite work because they've got this whole thing going where it just has its own rhythm and logic. I think Fargo would be my favorite Coen Brothers film.
Fargo?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I have yet to see it.
It's well worth it.
They were so good, didn't they? Like a series.
Yeah, they were so good they made a whole bunch of TV series out of it, out of the concept. But that whole idea, it's like you have a limited palette, possibly, depending on how you're doing this.
And how much money you've got.
Yeah, that's a big... Well, if you want to learn film, may I keep it... Don't just look at the big films today and the George Lucas's. Channel your inner Roger Corman.
Roger Corman.
Okay. The master of pre-production, I guess you could say. He was churning out crappy little B films in the space of 2 weeks, year in, year out. He's responsible for about 9,000 million B-grade films from the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s.
Wow.
I think he's doing dumb things like Five-Headed Shark or something like that these
Oh,
days.
like Shark Tornado.
Yeah,
type
that sort of
shit.
stuff. Yeah. That's the digital equivalent of a Roger Corman film.
Oh,
But he
okay,
did a whole
right.
pile of really cool stuff in the 60s with old, was it The Raven? The Mask of the Red Death? All the old Edgar Allan Poe stories he put to, made these really cheap and cheerful little...
What's the person's name? I'll look him up.
Roger Corman?
Roger who?
Roger Corman.
Is that Carry On Dick? Is that what that is?
Yep.
I can say that.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Roger Corman. No, Corman. Cor.
Damn it.
Sorry.
Corman,
I said Cor.
as in military.
Corman. There he is. There
Oh,
you go.
wow, okay. So old school Thrasher shit.
Yep. So
Yeah.
you'll recognize half of this stuff straight away.
Like Piranha, yep.
Yep. So he made
Wow.
zillions of these things. House of Usher would be one.
What would be the typical
Pendulum.
budget for something like that sort of style of
Back
thing?
in the day, it'd
Yeah.
be something like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 US.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Half of Hollywood's A-lists basically got their training on his
On that
films.
sort of stuff. Wow,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
The
So-
Wasp Woman.
Yeah.
Fuck, there's thousands of them.
Oh, there's zillions of them.
Wow,
right?
okay.
Okay, so that's channel your inner right, and what you want to do is find out how he actually put these things together, because he basically did his his pre-production to a T, because he
Wow.
knew that if you're going to churn out one of these things in 2 weeks, you cannot sit around making dumb decisions all day long. You're going to have all those decisions made up front, and then you got your budget and stuff, and then you let the kids handle it.
Wow.
And that was essentially what he did. So if you can imagine there was a Roger Corman, he'd probably get you and Leo to make a film in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And you'd basically sit down and do your homework.
Yeah, and pump it out.
And pump it out.
Wow, that's
so
fascinating.
That's the sort of thing. So that's the sort of stuff that you don't get to see in film schools. Oh, yeah. Cheap budget and pre-production. Lots of it.
Well, I guess having a cheap budget it teaches you how to be like hyper conscious and efficient with the resources that you have too, which would actually like make you a better filmmaker at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And so the franchise fodder that you see now is basically made by real estate agents and large corporations with $500 million budgets or whatever the hell it is.
Like ridiculous money.
So they're really the coals of filmmaking, not your little cafe or something. Whereas if you look at anything made in the 80s, the idea of a $40 million film was unheard of. In fact, in the early 80s, I believe, was it Reverend Moon? The Moonies?
The Moonies.
You know, the Unification Church in Korea? That really odd guy. It's probably passed away now.
$40 million back in the day, like adjusted for inflation, would be like probably like 100 million.
He had,
nowadays.
yes, that's right. So he made this vanity, the head of that church made this vanity project, and everyone in Hollywood was freaking out, $40 million for a film. What kind of nonsense is this? And, 5 years later.
People are spending $500 million on
That's
films.
right.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Wow.
it's just a whole different universe. And that was the whole rise of the franchise. So if you look at all the Disney stuff now, you know, it's essentially a theme park operator reupholstering
Making
its
movies.
content every now and then. So they go through and they re-release yet another old vintage film. Oh, a classic. And they'll put it at the premium rate because they only put it out once every 15 years. They go and make CGI versions of it because their market research says, people watch that stuff and we need to stay current. So our theme parks and our themed Navy cruise ships remains the same. So they're really just reupholstering their content. Because they're a content company.
What sort of influence do you feel like cinema has on pop culture and also by extension the way in which people think?
Not as much as it used to. Cinema was the premier cultural artifact. So Exhibit A, Star Wars. Exhibit B would probably be James Bond.
So would you be like, there's conspiracy theories out there which people call preemptive programming, which like, well, serious question.
Yeah.
Like they use cinema to really preempt. You don't think that's real? No? Okay.
No.
Do you think back in the day they were doing some shady shit?
Look, people have been stuck up their own behinds for a while now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you see people saying, oh, there's all these hidden messages in there. I'm thinking, dude, that's art direction.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, you know, artists, they use color. They know how to use color because they're artists. It's
and sort of like the argument that if you look into something too much, you're going to find absolutely everything.
I mean, this is the cumulative effort of anything up to 500 people or putting their all into something.
There's going to be something that pops up.
Everyone's going to put their own self into it at some point. It's going to get averaged out and magnified into this magnificent thing.
Yeah.
You know, but everyone puts their all into it. So the guy doing the buttons on the control panel in the corner there that you see briefly in a close-up. We thought, the director said, let's make this interesting. So they said, for a lark, I'll put a joke in there.
Put something dumb in there.
It's the Wizard of Oz button set. You know?
So all those sort of weird conspiracy theories, you reckon they're just people just like fucking around.
Yeah. So we got the auto destruct system here. We'll put all these little buttons with Vishnu and weird stuff in there that means suggestive stuff. And no one's going to see it.
But it's not like some Orwellian
No.
Yeah, okay.
No one's going to see it. And it keeps it interesting for us because we're in the grind of making this thing. And then, we can spare a few minutes and off they go. And then
I never actually thought about it like that.
40 years later, there's a bunch of internet nerds going, oh my God, look at that. Oh, you won't believe how stupid this internet meme is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know?
Wow, okay.
It's like the old internet clickbait thing.
Yeah.
You won't believe what happens to this bread when we toast it. Well, actually, yes, we do. But
can you debunk a myth for me? I don't know if it's a myth. Is the green code in the Matrix sushi recipe?
That and a lot more. I made the code.
So you were responsible for making the code. The green code in the Matrix.
The green code in the Matrix. It's a collaborative effort again. So the shader.
Can you say that again? You made the green code.
I made the green code. Yeah. So I assembled it. Now, the font came from this amazing designer called Simon Whiteley. And I didn't realize how important fonts were until I saw him build the font.
So he designed this font from scratch.
He pretty much designed it from scratch. And so he did the thing where it had to be utterly generic. It had to be a language. He did it 26 characters in a space, I think. So he designed this thing so that it was every single character was utterly distinctive from every other character. So it wasn't like you got an E and an F, and the only difference between them was a stroke missing. It was like every single character was completely distinct. He went through at least 24 major iterations on that thing before he was happy with it.
24?
24,
wow.
at least. This is A-level design we're talking here, right?
Okay. How much money is that?
It's time, months of time.
Months and months.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's definitely kanji in there, and he would have been inspired by Sushi, but I remember him telling me he'd put a few Cyrillic characters in there.
Really?
Yeah, some Russian ones, like backwards, or the backwards R or that sort of stuff, because they were quite distinct from the Latin stuff. So there's a couple of numbers in there. There's a couple of one or two Greek characters. There's a couple of simple kanji characters. There was a couple of Cyrillic characters and a bit. It's got everything in there. He just, it's like...
Went to town.
He put all this stuff into it and then rendered it down and rendered it down and rendered it down. And then, it's like cooking, built this fantastic sauce. And then when I put it on, it's like, you'd say, oh, no, that doesn't work. And you'd go off and rebuild it again. And I put it into a situation, like, you go back and change it again. So, he put a lot of time and effort. So, it is sushi rolls and a whole lot more.
Wow, okay.
He was serious.
I remember watching that movie for the first time when I was like 12. And then, looking up like weird conspiracy theories on the internet and stuff. And like that was, I think that's what I remember looking for. Is that it was actually sushi.
It's essentially reference.
Yeah.
Right, Leo? Your reference. When you go and do your artwork, you look up your reference.
It always has to be reference.
Not always, but usually.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
He looked up his reference. We got a problem to solve. We need something that defines an entire cosmos.
Did you meet the directors?
Yeah, a few times.
Wow. Who?
They looked like two skater dudes with big oversized shorts and backwards facing caps.
Yeah, they like to wear backwards
They're
caps.
the classic 90s cliche.
Back
when
they were dudes, right?
Yeah.
And who are now sisters.
Yes.
Yep.
Could you fact check that for us?
The Wachowski sisters.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
Wow.
So they described all this thing, and I'd already been involved in Sharktopus Whalewolf. Oh my goodness.
Sharktopus.
Sorry, I'm getting distracted by Leo here.
That's all right.
So basically...
so these guys used to be brothers?
Yeah.
Wow.
So you're best described as the siblings, really. That's fine.
That's such a cool power move, though. Like having two siblings creating, not just having one person write such a great movie, but like...
So the code itself, there was the guy who wrote the original shader for me. So I kind of went up to him and said, okay, I've got to make this thing. And we decided eventually to build a shader that would take this strip of texture with the 26 characters and a space on it, chop it up into little 26 squares and a space, and then randomly put them together like type in a old text file. But it wouldn't just type them out randomly. It would actually, we'd concatenate it. That is, there's an old Unix command called cat, where you can read a binary file into another file, but you can feed it into a text file and get all this kind of mad gibberish appear.
Wow.
And then as it appears, it randomly picks up random, not just random letters and numbers, but it also picks up random things like carriage returns and backspaces and clear pages and format this and tab that.
Wow.
So when it comes in, stop just
all random.
You go out random. I think, yeah, we want something like that, but a little more. The Wachowskis were asking for water running down glass. So okay, got to make this water running down glass.
So
plus code.
Is that what they had in their
font.
head?
Yep.
Exactly what you made? Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then I was thinking, the more they describe this stuff, the more it sounded like an old-fashioned green screen monitor. So I basically built a widescreen version of an old Commodore PET screen. So if you want to look up a Commodore PET there, Leo.
Yeah, sure.
So a Commodore PET screen.
A
I don't think
Commodore
I've ever
PET.
heard of that.
This
I'm
is an
picturing the
8
Holden Commodore.
Commodore, you're thinking Commodore Computers, PET. Oh, look at that.
Oh, yes, of course.
Right.
Yeah, with the really with the green type. Yeah, okay.
It's all right. So the thing about it is it's an old CRT. So what happens is that when the green goes up, it leaves a phosphor glow behind it because it's actually, it's a cathode ray tube. There's an electron gun firing at a charged grid of phosphors that glow.
Wow.
And when the thing disappears, they kind of fade out like an old light globe. So I basically built the code so it did all its kind of funky stuff. And then I turned my big, beautiful silicon graphics workstation, there you go, that stuff. So that stuff there.
So this is the inspiration
that
behind...
format there is what I was using for the code. Now, just swap that out with that lovely font that Simon built, and you're starting to get to where we were. It's literally RGB green.
Because what I wanted to ask you
no
was...
No colour at all, except...
Sort of like what...
green.
So that's obviously the inspiration behind the colour green.
So as the type ran, I'd pick up the previous frame I'd just put together, blur it and mix it in underneath, and then take the frame before that, blur it even more and put it underneath. So you'd end up with these little boat trails after all the code. So all the bits that were moving would leave a little trail of phosphor behind them, little 4 or 5 frame long greeny blob that would get more diffuse. And all the stuff that was sitting there would just sit there and glow and fluoresce nicely. And that would kind of give you this nice organic looking feel.
Wow.
So it was a combination of that amazing font, the shader, me arranging this thing and trying to work out the choreography of getting it in. And in the end, I ended up having all the stuff cycling around. Then I took an entire plane, chopped it up into strips, offset the strips and just slid them over the top of it like an old-fashioned cardboard cutout animation. And that worked a treat.
Well, that just sounds like so many hours of work. That
Most of
went
it
into
trying to work out where we're going to go with this thing and how it's going to work. And the thing for me was like, no, this has got to be simple. You look at all the subsequent ones and they've got layers and layers and layers and layers. And it's all complex. Like, no. This has to be simple. And I mean, I'm thinking almost Saul Bass simple, if you know Saul Bass. Saulbass. The famous titler that did films like Psycho.
Wow, okay.
Right, did the titles for that. So his thing was that he was just a graphic designer. And so I couldn't make it too complicated because I had to use this code not just for the titles, but I also had to use it as on some actual green screen environments. I think I ended up making 3 flavors of it: a dense layer, a normal layer, and a thin layer. So the dense layer would go on the agents. There's a shot where there's 3 agents at the end of a corridor, all done in green code.
Yeah, wow.
So the agents are done in dense code,
when
so they
Neo's
fluoresce.
transcending into the next dimension.
But the thin code was used on all the walls. So there are multiple layers of code in the walls. But if I used the regular code, it just turned into green soup. You wouldn't see anything.
Yeah.
So, I had to make different flavors of it.
Lindsay, is that one of the reasons that you kind of stepped down from high-level VFX because of being overworked and whatnot?
Oh, that's more after 13 years of working at Animalogic. I worked 2.5 years at Happy Feet as a senior layout.
Got to meet George Miller.
Oh, yeah, had got to work with George Miller. That was quite something.
Wow, that's fucking cool.
I just needed a bit of a break. 2.5 years of that was just like, oh, God, my whole universe is trapped in a basement. And I ended up picking up a bit of work at Rising Sun and then eventually flopped home in Perth. I think I was recovering from my 2nd or 3rd pacemaker by that point. I think, I might just take some time out here.
Chill out a bit.
And then time out turned into 6 months and then it became 12 months. I'm thinking, what am I doing with my life? One of those moments. And then eventually picked up a job at Interzone Games when it was still around.
Interzone Games?
About 10 years ago now. And,
What sort of games would they be known for?
None.
None.
What about that pet game that you did?
The pet game. Oh, I did a bit of contract work. I did some animation for, was it Fabulous Pets or something on the PlayStation or Xbox?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But that was pretty much like, oh, we got this thing, do this. Like, okay. No, don't like it, do it again. That's it. Good, great. Next, here's the next one. Right, got to churn a couple of these over the next couple of months.
Wow.
Send in the invoices. Whew, that's over. So, but yeah.
Have you worked on any other games?
Not really.
Not so much? Is that something you'd love to get into?
My own mad creations that never went anywhere.
Oh, okay. Right.
And that's when I decided about late 90s, mid 90s, I thought, I'm not a coder. So I will put it away and never touch it again.
So is designing games much of a coder's sort of field of thing?
I was doing world building in Interzone's soccer game. So that was interesting. I came from, I mean, you think of the level of complexity that George Miller puts into something. Think of Fury Road, for example.
Search up George Miller for us, just to pull up a photo.
Right.
Yeah.
So Fury Road is essentially Mad Max, but it's got more dramatic close-ups and big close-ups than a spaghetti western, whilst at the same time they've got this camera on a robot arm on the back of a pickup.
There you go.
This extraordinary stuff on Fury Road. And it's all immaculately framed and composed.
Oh, he was born in Brisbane.
Yep. And
76 years, going hard.
Yeah, I don't know how he made Fury Road, to be honest. God, I must have nearly killed him. So this is a guy that I'd be sitting there and I'd have a sequence of 3D where I've got the character motion cap plus layout ground plus cameras plus crude lighting and I'm blocking it all out to see where everything's going to fit and go. So, right, okay, at some point we'll take all this stuff and give it to the animators and they'll make all the final animation on the faces and the texturers will get in there and finalize all the textures and stuff. So I only ever saw the crude low resolution model layout, but the cameras were atom perfect.
Wow.
And he'd be sitting there thinking, oh no, we need a bit more air here, a bit more this, and you think, oh god. And we'd go through like 30 iterations on a sequence.
Wow.
And we'd get it right in about sequence 12. Yep, that's looking pretty damn good, I thought. Yep. And they'd come in, no, he'd come in and say, well, now we're going to make it creamy. Make it look fantastic. And he'd go and make more changes to it, and it would just get better. And the following day he'd do another one, and it'd get better again. And,
was he responsible for the original Mad Maxes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Wow. So he's been around for a very long time.
Yep.
Yeah.
He was part of that. Well, actually, no, he wasn't part of that. He was part of the Australian explosion of 70s films. That was what put us on the map originally culturally. But he wasn't actually part of that whole funding thing. He did it completely independently of it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting story, that. Yeah. So that was back in the days of the 10BA films.
10BA. Wow.
10BA. Back when they used to give a $150 or 150% tax return on any films you made.
150%.
You can imagine the
150%.
gold rush that resulted in that. Go up and look up 70s.
Wow,
Aussie,
I did not know that.
Australian exploitation film 70s. You should have fun. It's like
look that up for us later.
It's like Roger Corman all over again, but down under.
Wow, so they're really like trying to get movies made.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sometime. Wow, okay.
Back in the days when we actually didn't treat the arts with less importance than painting white lines on the road.
Yeah, it's a bit of a contentious issue at the moment.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Oh, there's actually a doco for it. I think Tarantino put together. In fact, that might be it there. Not quite Hollywood. Ozploitation.
Ozploitation. I've never heard of this term.
Really?
Wow. Ozploitation.
Dude, you get to see all these old actors in their prime.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. Can't go wrong.
The man from Hong Kong.
Yes. Brian Trenchard Smith. And there's Stone. Now, you probably want to check out Stone because that's the film that led up to Mad Max.
Wow. I just want to continue talking about The Matrix because it's one of my fucking favorite films of all time.
Silly, right time, right place.
Are there any other movies that you are aware of that used green as such a specific color for the color grading?
Pretty much anything in the 90s that was trying to look cyber.
Okay. Because I feel like
green is a cyber color, actually.
It's the cyber color.
It is such a cyber color.
I tried to make subtle greens, olive greens, these greens, greens with yellow trails, and it just looked like murk when I finally, and then realized, wait, just take all the red out, take all the blue out, just straight 010 RGB green. And like, that's it, perfect, don't change a thing. Wow, you got great sense of color. I'm thinking, oh, I'm a fraud.
Yeah. Because anybody who's seen the movie, like, green is like obviously the core color.
And you'll
why
find
do you reckon it's not more common?
You'll find that all the shots in that film are graded. There's a blue layer for realism in the murky underworld, and there's a yellow layer, I think, when they're in the dojo, I think. Then there's the green one when they're in the Matrix.
Lawrence Fishburne and Neo are fighting.
So they have 3 distinct color grades that they assign to each scene.
But depending on the scene,
you are.
you want to convey a certain feeling. Wow, okay.
So check it out. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like, oh, that's really crude and obvious.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm glad you told me that now, because I'm going to be critically analysing it every time I see it.
This is, I mean, with digital, you can do this now. You're not just cobbling together your own virtual environments and animating them and lighting them and doing all that stuff. You're also your post-production as well. Not just the visual effects, but also the finishing touches and the grading and all that stuff. You're doing that too. So it's the bar has almost disappeared.
Yeah, wow. So in terms of colouring, how much manpower is usually put into just that aspect of producing a film?
Probably not as much as you think, because that would be done in the editing suite.
Okay, right.
So and on things like Happy Feet, and Happy Feet was kind of unusual because that was like a full-blown production with unlimited budget, it seemed like. It never seemed to be counting individual dollars or something. It was an entirely different realm.
Wow.
They actually had some dude in a Hawaiian shirt from Hollywood lurking around there just to make sure it was all being spent properly. Very interesting seeing a power player like that actually in play, because you see all these people kind of orbit around him as they go past.
So Happy Feet, you sort of had a bit more freedom to really do a lot of things.
Sort of.
Which is interesting, because that's like a really big aspect of the movie itself.
It was like building one of those 300-year cathedrals, but doing it in 3 years flat. Right. So in fact, that was a metaphor we got used a lot. It's like, yes, we're building this magnificent cathedral temple thing, but we still need, 250,000 bricks.
Yeah. Wow.
So what did I do for the next 2.5 years? Well, I helped build bricks. And they all were precisely laid out in such a way so that when you put them all together, you get a beautiful thing. So at the time, it doesn't feel very creative at all. It just feels like endless file management. So, yeah.
Are you working on anything big at the moment?
I'm scoping the next bunch of courses for
your lecturing.
TAFE. Yeah, it's still lecturing. Right. That's the main. That takes up most of my time.
When did you get into teaching and lecturing?
Well, after Interzone disintegrated, and I was sort of at a loose end and did a bit of contract work here and there, like the fancy pet stuff. I had a major illness that kind of nearly wiped me out.
Wow. What illness was that?
Staphylococcus, actually. Got inside my pacemaker and poisoned my blood, and it was all quite nasty.
Wow.
I was in hospital for 5 weeks, and
that's horrible.
Recovering for about a better part of a year, and then one of my fellow lecturers popped up and said, "Oh, Lindsay, you want to become a TAFE lecturer?" I thought, genius, I'll do that. And
Which one was that?
That was Tanya.
Oh, it was Tanya, yeah. So you were already friends with Tanya before you started teaching?
I reconnected with FTI a little bit when I got back and bumped into Tanya and participated in some of the early Wham Bams and stuff.
So how long have you known Tanya?
20
years?
More like 15, I think.
Oh, wow.
Do you feel like teaching has actually taught you quite a lot in terms of your animation skills?
I know far more now about what I was doing than I ever did when I was doing it.
It's interesting because you hear that a lot from teachers, that they learn so much from teaching other people different things.
The difficulty with doing a course is that you're always dealing with students, so you can't drill right down to the absolute depth of knowing exactly what you're doing. So it always feels like I'm bouncing off the surface like a stone, skipping a stone on a river or something. But yeah, in terms of what I know about how to put stuff together, it's much more comprehensive than it ever was back then.
Wow.
And when you're having to teach stuff, you're forced to kind of like, oh, okay, I have to get this across in a very simple way, or in a way that they'll get eventually.
So do you sort of say, like, because I'm sure like anybody listening in, and everybody's always had teachers who they didn't really get along with personally. How much of the blame do you put on yourself for students who don't do well? Do you feel like that's a lot to do with the teaching style? Or
sometimes.
There are sometimes kids who just you can't manage in certain ways.
With the stuff that filmmaking and animation and stuff, the way I was taught it was like, here it is, here's the facilities, you've got 12 months to make something, you're probably going to get a lot of contacts in this place, correct? Well, you do, and off you go. And if you live or die, it's entirely in your own hand.
So sink or swim.
Yeah, basically.
Make of it what you will.
And ultimately, if you're not doing that, you're not going to get a gig anywhere.
Okay.
So, I can sort of guide you through it, but, You can't
You
look
have to
after
be
yourself.
willing to push through, basically.
Absolutely.
Because a few times I nearly crushed.
Oh, look, we all go through that. I mean, that's ups and downs are the norm, right? And like I tell the visual effects students, like 80% of this is trying to work out what the hell you're doing, troubleshooting. Like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this. Oh. This is what experience is all about. And so, like I say, it really depends on what you're doing. But not everybody comes to do our course to be an animator or a filmmaker. I mean, at the moment, we've got a good crop of people that are doing just that, and they want to get into the field. And you can thank COVID for that, I think. So all of a sudden, interest has spiked.
Wow, okay.
We were like, counting students on one hand at one point, and now we're getting relatively full classes. It's quite amazing.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's very interesting. And also there's visual effects popping up in Perth all over the place.
So you feel like Perth is a bit of like an up-and-coming spot for visual effects stuff?
And we're scrambling to get ready for it. So
wow.
At the same time, we've had our big federal... So we're in the vet sector. So basically, we get all these vet units that we teach, and they're really just a bunch of benchmarks. Can your students do all this stuff? Yes, no.
Competency checking.
Check.
Yeah.
That's it. How we teach it is entirely up to us.
Wow.
So that's pretty good. So there's none of this curriculum stuff. So at the moment, we're currently developing updated courses for everything we're doing. So just in time for the sudden VFX upsurge. So we're running around in circles.
That's pretty cool. You must be pretty excited that Perth's actually getting on the map a bit.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So we're basically trying to catch it as it goes flying past us.
Yeah, definitely something you want to be capitalising on for sure.
So thinking on your feet is a bit of a thing. So it either rains or it's a desert, or it's you're either starving or you're feasting. It's very little in between. It's certainly not regular work, or it might be, but we don't know yet.
So just before we wrap up, I wanted to, because one of my mum's favourite movies of all time is Moulin Rouge. Could you take us through a bit of the stuff that you did on that?
Okay, so I built. This is again a team effort. So I would have been part of the construction crew building the 18th or 19th century Paris.
Oh, okay,
right. So that was the main thing I worked on, plus a few camera moves. Although I managed to avoid, thank heavens, the early part of the camera moves where they had to match the live action motion control through the big ballroom scenes. They would then fly out the window, and then they go to a big bunch of miniatures using the same camera move with a smaller scale motion control move, which would then segue to a 3D virtual environment. And some poor sods, whole room of poor sods had to work out how to get all the camera moves to line up seamlessly so it looked like one thing.
Wow.
I did spend a couple of weeks putting fairy wings on Kylie Minogue. That was pretty good.
Really?
Yeah.
So you had some interactions with the actors and stuff?
No, I just got given all these shots and say, here, put some fairy wings on Kylie Minogue.
What was she like as a person?
She was very professional and very good.
Wow.
It was, lots of, So basically had all these like 30 odd shots or something. Like, when do you want these? And so we split it up between two or three of us, and we all kind of worked on our own shots and stuck them together.
What year did that movie come out?
It was 2002,
2001.
2001? Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
It's all a bit of a blur back then.
Wow. So are you a fan of musicals?
No.
No, neither am I. I'm glad you said that. Honestly,
No.
I fucking hate them. Like,
Even La La Land.
A wise person.
seeing them in person.
I get why they work,
yeah.
but I'm not into them.
Yeah, in the movie format, I do not like them at all. But being there in person, like watching it on stage, is cool. I do like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's some classic ones out there, but yeah. I think some of the old ones I remember. There's one called Starstruck from the 80s that caught my imagination for a little bit. That's early 80s, Ozploitation again. You may want to check it out. Gillian Armstrong film, I think, if I remember rightly.
So you haven't worked on any like Broadway style musical things?
No,
Would that be something you'd be looking to get into?
Probably not.
Probably not.
No. I don't think I could stand an MCU movie. I'd just quietly die inside, I think.
So you have talking about MCU, like Scorsese came out and said that he sort of despises that sort of stuff.
Well, it's going back to the old school, really. It's the go out each week and watch a newsreel, a Western, the serial and stuff. It's like, it does its job. It services something. It fills up Netflix's, Disney Plus's, Disney's thing. Yeah, that's all it is. It's just 21st century carry-on film series, really.
Yeah.
Just made for our generation.
Oh, Zach, you know that Lindsay was
this
actually
generation.
on set for one day on The Matrix.
Oh, that's
He was
right.
actually on set.
There's a shot where I think
Like on film,
Trinity,
like on camera.
yeah, well,
Oh, like
I
sort of
did
just
very.
on,
Being a backroom CGI dude, I was like stuck in a basement for
Yeah.
99% of the time.
and you were just like keen to get out and fucking.
Get to see and check out the visual
Wasn't it
effect
the shot when
It's
Trinity
when
jumps out
Trinity
the
crashes
helicopter?
into a glass window.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
Is
you
that
see
when?
this big fracture
Yeah.
of glass, right?
Wow.
They took 2 days to set that up. They had this immense 3 or 4 story high set of green screens and in this kind of like almost like this giant canyon with a big giant crane or 2 or 3 giant cranes looking over it and big pile of soft stuff for the stuntman. It wasn't her, it was a stuntman. I think they replaced her face or something. And basically they spent 2 days standing around waiting for things to happen as they set up for these things with big panes of glass and stuff for this
Wow.
one couple of seconds cutaway
Wow.
to get the right shot.
That
Yeah.
means you saw the actors in the flesh.
Yeah, I did. She's very short.
Is she tiny? Is she?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd see her in the cafe occasionally. She's just like
Yeah.
she just looks like this regular short student.
Did you
really.
meet Keanu Reeves?
No.
No?
Oh, hang on. I don't think I did. No, I don't think I did.
Fuck, that would have been cool to meet.
That would have been
him,
very
eh?
cool to read. He's a bit of a dude.
Hey, he's such a dude.
What's it's
Yeah.
in he reminds me of some of the really old-fashioned movie stars. If you listen to some of the descriptions of characters like, say, Charlie Chaplin, he was a real man of the people thing.
Yeah, Keanu's definitely.
Yeah.
like
And
that.
Keanu's definitely in that mold. He's like going back to the 30s or 20s almost. Yeah.
Wow. Are
Very
you a
interesting.
Chaplin fan?
It's all old stuff now, but yeah, I appreciate what he did.
Yeah, because I think there's obviously been a lot of talk about him, but just in terms of like his
I think he's
underlying messages in terms of all those
well,
symbology and all that
he was a socialist.
it's
so-
really a voice for the working class.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So you go and watch Modern Times, and he's having a crack at Henry Ford because it's current at the time. You look at was it The Great Dictator? He was the only person in Hollywood taking pot shots at Hitler long
Wow.
before it became propaganda fodder. And he's that famous last speech he gives, which is doing the rounds still now. It's like bloody hell,
Yeah, wow.
So that sort of stuff. And when you see it put to the music of Inception or something, it's like, oh, for heaven's sake.
This adds a whole nother level of intensity to the conversation.
Good thing you put the music on. I wouldn't have known it was epic otherwise.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Great. Delete. Die. It's like, yeah. So, but it's every new generation making their own. So who cares what an old dinosaur like me thinks?
Well, fair enough.
Look, every new generation has to reinvent it for itself.
And
Right. We don't get. I mean, I get nostalgic for the old 1956 The Thing, but it's really the John Carpenter version that works. The latest 211 one didn't for me. It was too busy.
I haven't
trying
seen that,
to-
but I've read the reviews and apparently it's a bit of a letdown.
It's okay until you realize
a little bit
there's a better
modernised.
version of it made previously.
But it is a prequel. It's not a sequel
That's
or
right.
a remake.
And the freaking thing's relying on jump scares for half its work. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, for heaven's sake,
Well, I just sort of feel like looking
am I
at.
supposed to be paranoid with jump scares? Boo!
I think like when you talk about old horror movies and stuff. Well, what do you reckon's been the reason for the shift from like really strong story to just bullshit?
What do you mean
Jump
bullshit?
scare.
Jump scare.
Yeah.
Partly because you can do stuff digitally now.
Right. Okay.
So
And
you
it's
can
completely
literally-
altered
you
the
can
way in which
literally-
people write the
you
story.
Well, they're still just reproducing The Exorcist endlessly.
Yeah.
That whole found footage thing. If you look at The Exorcist is shot like a documentary.
Like Blair Witch Project.
Right.
type.
They took out all the talky bits in The Exorcist, and you just left it with a kind of standalone camera thing, and that's what it works.
Wow.
Blair Witch has a lot to answer for, but yeah, no, I think it's. I mean, there's some good ones out. I think I've still yet to sit down and what's that one? God, completely forgotten. Oops. It's not. The Babadook.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, the
Babadook.
Babadook.
That's an Australian film, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I want to check that out.
Adelaide.
I watched that recently actually.
That's one I've got on my list of things to do.
I'm not sure if I was scared by it, but it was definitely like a really, really
Oh, yeah.
amazing film to watch.
It's just, for me,
so
it's
fucking
unsettling.
dark.
So
dude.
what?
Yeah.
So what you've got is essentially an
The
old-fashioned.
Babadook. Weird.
You've got in the 1940s they made a whole pile of suspense films for quote women unquote, the women's film. So you got things like Cat People and stuff like that. So they're going for suspense films, And there was a whole genre of suspense films, like dramatic suspense or scary suspense. And I think The Babadook would probably fit that mold pretty well. So it's not about, horror, ghastly, blood and gore and guts.
Yeah.
It's more like the implication of what it is.
Yeah, so like The Babadook, if anybody hasn't seen it, there's not really anything in it from memory that was actually quite scary, just in as scene wise.
Yep.
It's just about the general vibe that this child gives off, and
So it's
also
like
with the color of everything.
Someone's made a horror film out of parental anxiety.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
They haven't made it for that mythical 12-year-old white boy
with a monster that's going to fucking jump out and grab you.
You turn you into a turnip or something.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
So that's that sort of film where it's as much about dramatic suspense and the implications of what it might mean is more important than giving the monster at the end and everyone going, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche
Boring.
when you do that.
Yeah. So,
have you got any modern horror films that you're like a big fan of?
The Host.
The Host.
That's a good creature feature.
Wow.
South Korean film.
Are you a fan of The Conjuring?
Conjuring. No.
No. I thought I feel like
Probably what you found with this series when they make 8 of these things, that the first one's all right.
It's exactly what I was about to say.
It'll be just be.
Yeah.
The first one is really good.
This is a pretty good genre film. And they might make
Yeah.
a sequel and think, okay, it's Friday the 13th or it's Freddy Krueger number 3. Or number 5 is usually when they're going to space or the future. That's the other one.
It just seems like I feel like horror could be such a great, like this is just my own personal opinion, could be such a great genre, but they always lack in like good quality writing style. Like they always go for like a really B-grade cliche sort of storyline.
So if you're going to, good science fiction can do that as well. For example, Alien and The Thing are half sci-fi, half horror. The minute you put supernatural into there, what you really got is a Christian fantasy film.
Yeah.
Would you say that about A Quiet Place as well?
Yeah, that would work. Although it's a very loud, quiet place if you think about it. It's a monster. Well, that's a good gimmick, but it's tearing steel open with its bare claws. Like, don't think so.
Yeah, same old sort
I
of
would
shit.
make it more like the Triffids, where you have an angry pot plant. And if you attacked it with a pitchfork...
Can you search that up? The Triffids.
The Triffids. I don't know what a Triffid is.
Never.
Holy moly, you guys have got a lot of work to do. The Triffids. Or Day of the Triffids, actually. The Day of the Triffids. Otherwise, you might get the band. Triffids ID.
Triffids in the Pines.
They're mobile plants with a sting.
There you go.
There you go. That's the rock band. Now go and look for Day of the Triffids.
Is this an Australian film that you're talking about?
British science fiction by a guy called John Wyndham. It's got that kind of old classic Doctor Who vibe about it.
Wow, okay.
62?
That's the movie, but that's the sort of thing.
I love that art.
Cheesy.
That cover art's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty silly. But the original novel is the thing you're probably looking at. BBC made a great 6-part miniseries out of it in the 1980s, and they made a really shit one in the 2000s. The 1980s one, I think, is probably the best version of anything visual I've seen, mainly because it seems to get the vibe just right, even though it's very 80s. The 80-fied it.
Wow.
It works really well. But some of the best science fiction, I think, is the conceptual stuff. And really good science fiction often gets metaphysical as well. So a good example of that would be Arrival.
That is I love that movie.
Right.
That
so
is such
the
a great
main
movie.
theme of that is language.
Yeah, it's how
everything changes with language.
Yeah, so I think it's called linguistic relativity, like the concept of how language actually alters the way in which you think.
That's right.
They
And
touch
how
on
you
that
see
sort of
things
stuff.
and see the world. I mean, they do a little bit of magic box thinking where they've got some magical artifact or magical of power that allows her to actually do what she's doing, literally. But the idea is that they give us a guidebook to learn their language, and that's the gift they give us because they know in 3,000 years, oh shit, we've got a problem we can't solve it. We're just knocking on the door to our neighbours. Oh, you have a cup of sugar? We've got a problem here.
Do you feel like knowing so much about film yourself that it's sort of
it's
like
a beautiful solution.
You're able to critically analyse film, but it's sort of ruined it for you in a way?
What you have to learn is it's like having a repair kit in your car.
Yeah, okay.
When you're doing it, you just get in there and do it. And then if something breaks, then you get the repair kit out and start to pull it to bits.
Okay.
If you start analysing it as you're doing it, you'll kill it. It's like trying to do an audit on a comedian by checking all their jokes before they tell them. No, those jokes don't work anymore.
Yeah.
You explained them to us. Fail. It's okay. The process will kill it. So it's the same with filmmaking. Or anything for that matter.
Wow. Okay.
Practice.
How long have we been going for there? I feel like it's been a while.
I feel like I've been wandering all over the place with absolutely no rhyme or reason of any kind whatsoever.
An hour 24.
An hour 24.
Good God.
Yeah, geez, going a while. I think we might wrap it up.
Probably what you should do is like Pick a subject and we'll just stick to that.
Want to pick a subject? Do you feel like we're all trapped in the Matrix as a human race? No. Can you prove it?
COVID. Every time we build our little fantasy castles, get lost inside the infinitely complicated, subtle, beautiful labyrinth that we create within, something comes outside, kicks the little tripod that it's all wobbling on top of, brings it all down, and we realize, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, this is just like our grandparents' time. They thought civilization was ending too with the Second World War and the Great Depression and all that stuff. And here we are. And, you know, we get the aftermath version of it. Oh, yeah, Winston Churchill was great. Hitler was evil. Everyone knew it. But when you go back to the original history, you realize that there was a good chunk of the population that thought Hitler was doing the right thing. When the Second World War started for the Brits, nothing happened for 6 months. They called it the phony war. Nothing went down. And they were thinking, well, what the fuck? Why are we locking down? You know, blah, blah, blah. And then finally the Blitz hit. And I think that's what New South Wales is doing its equivalent of right now.
I watched a film about Winston Churchill. I think it's called The Darkest Hour.
Yep.
A couple of nights ago. I thought it was really good. And I only just realised watching that film that the US only got involved in World War II like a few years
3 years into
after it occurred. Right. So
and that was only because they had a September 11th of their own.
Yeah, Pearl
basically.
Harbor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it essentially started in Europe, and it took the Japanese getting involved for the US to sort of break their neutrality.
The Yanks were looking in on it and thinking, oh, dear God, the Europeans are at it again. They've been doing this for centuries, just slaughtering each other for no good reason whatsoever. They were staying well out of it. And that's where a lot of that isolationism was coming from. We didn't spend all this time setting up the Republic just to kind of get dragged back into this frickin' cesspit again. So that's what they were thinking. And then suddenly the Japanese blew up on their side of the world and they just panicked.
Do you know that, was it Eisenhower was the president?
He was one of the generals.
Who was the president?
He was the president. That would have been Roosevelt.
Roosevelt, yeah.
Truman and Roosevelt. I think Truman took over when Roosevelt died. And Eisenhower would have been a president in the 50s. He's the guy who coined the term military-industrial complex.
Yeah, that's a fucking harrowing speech to listen to.
Well, I grew up on that. I'm a child of the Cold War. So it was nothing but that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you think dark times are on now. I mean, the Cold War was over by 10 years when you guys were born.
What was that like growing up in that period?
Well,
communism was taking over.
No. No one was thinking that because détente was all the rage by that point. And the Russians loved their children too. But the idea was that nuclear destruction was the pressing thing at the time. And if the subject ever came up anywhere, you could quieten a room. And that'll include a bunch of grotty year 9s in high school would all go quiet. Like no one wanted to face up to it. And they all think, oh no, it's something else that happened somewhere else. But, you know, at any point, we were 20 minutes away from blowing ourselves up.
Especially with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, that was the thing that broke the spell for the Yanks. I think in the Brits, here's another one for you, Leo. Look up The War Game. Not plural, The War Game.
The War Game.
TV show, British. Not the Broderick version, which is The War Games.
War Games, yeah, with an S. It's a good movie.
The War Game is this incredibly angry TV. I think it's a show. It's a single special.
That one's 66. Wow.
That's it. Pseudo-documentary. So they did a kind of fly-on-the-wall fake documentary. There was a style of documentary that they used to make. Another one of that classic example would be Culloden. But you can look that up as an example of the genre, not this thing. So basically,
wait, Culloden's a film or is it?
Culloden is a famous study that I had to study in film school. And basically they staged Culloden, but they did it like a modern day riot documentary with TV cameras and stuff. And they're interviewing all the soldiers and stuff. And it's like, and the immediacy of it's quite startling. And they go through all the massacres and nightmare and horror of what's happening, but they've done it like they're doing handheld television. Monty Python rip it off a little bit with the Holy Grail.
Wow. Okay.
Right at the very end of the film. Anyway, they take that approach with The War Game, where Britain gets nuked. And basically, its whole point is like, everything the government has told you is bullshit. None of the shit works. They just say the stuff to keep you quiet and shut you up. And by comparison, when I saw things like, you know, the American versions of that, it was like watching Archie and Veronica by comparison. It's like, was it The Last Day or whatever it was? What's the famous ones like Threads and I can't even remember them now. I've forgotten them. But, the sun comes up at the end. It's like, well, that's some kind of nuclear winter, I don't think. But, we're going to have an upbeat ending. We're Americans. Like, no. But, yeah, that stuff is what we grew up on.
The prospect of nuclear war in Australia, was that like a big deal back in the day?
Yes, and it wasn't because we were in it directly. It was like if they were going to make an example of something that was safe to blow up and not start a war, a place like Australia would be
perp.
Yeah. Was it down round Rockingham, Peel Inlet? I think we had the American fleet used to station itself down there. That would make a nice prime target to get taken out of any potential conflict beforehand.
Wow.
So the idea was if there was anything on, it would be full on. They just empty silos at each other. And basically they'd hit all their primary targets and their secondary targets and their tertiary targets.
Wow.
Didn't know you were a history buff.
No. What do you mean history buff? This is my childhood I'm talking about.
Yeah, you lived through this shit.
I lived through this shit. So I think at one point they would have had, was it 20,000 or 30,000 warheads each? I think the Yanks had the superior numbers, but at that point everyone realised it was just irrelevant by that point. But that's the sort of thing that we were sort of growing up with. So if you watch some of the old classic Doctor Who's, say, or any of those old TV shows like that, you'll probably see things like the Daleks.
Right.
The Daleks are essentially a metaphor on Nazism. And it wouldn't be unusual for Doctor Who to have a story where an alien race is at its end and it gets wiped out by a nuclear war. Well, that stuff was like, it just got wiped out by a nuclear war. It's like that stuff was it being relevant to our time at the time. So, like, I think there's one of the episodes, I can't remember which one it is, but they're saying, it was this big war. It went for 6 minutes. And the Doctor's going, wow, 6 minutes, that long. That was a big war, It's like, because, it's all over once the first warheads hit and it's all over, Red Rover.
Well, no, as soon as you have any sort of retaliation.
Why do you think there were so many post-apocalyptic stories being made in the 80s?
Because, a reflection of what was actually going on in the world.
You look at all the science fiction made between 2001, 1968, and Star Wars, 1977. Not one of them has a nice thing to say about the near future. Not one.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty troubling prospect to be thinking about. Even nowadays when you have the whole discussion around denuclearization and all that. If you're wondering what those SALT treaties were doing, and if you're wondering why the uranium industry isn't doing very well, it's because they've been mining those nuclear warheads ever since for fuel. Wow.
That's why they were so easily designed.
Could you search up the amount of nuclear warheads the US has access to? It would be like 30 or 40,000.
Well, at the height, it was about that.
Before they started to cut down.
Yeah. Well, they just couldn't maintain it. It was bankrupting them all. And so basically when the Soviets went down, they just collapsed first. The States was not that far behind them.
So, yeah, I'm pretty sure the United States is still the world leader.
It's tiny compared to what it is now.
Oh, wow. So Russia is actually, since January 2020, number of nuclear warheads worldwide total, 13,000. Yeah, well, I thought it was a lot more than that. Okay.
I think worldwide would be like 40,000 or 30,000 at the time.
Wow.
But
so we've cut back like substantially. Okay.
So in terms of problems like global warming and COVID, they're pretty major, right? But in terms of what we had previously, I remember doing a social studies project in the 70s, grade 6 or grade 5 or 4 or something. And we had a world map and we had to mark down with little graphics all the little war zones that were going down. I think I ended up with 20 or 30 little explosion icons on my map. There was about 3 or 4 or half a dozen what they call brush fire wars going on in Africa. There was Pol Pot at the time and a whole pile of stuff going on in Asia. Britain had the IRA doing its seasonal Christmas bombings.
The IRA were pretty intense back in the day.
So there were,
Catholic or Protestant.
If you're wondering in this 21st century how people say, why didn't they ever say that sort of thing? People are so primitive now, and no one ever mentioned the Me Too movement, and no one talked about this, and why didn't they report these guys?
Preoccupied.
It wasn't that they didn't do it. It was just that there was a whole range of topics that you never brought up. For example, if you were talking safely amongst white folk, one thing you never brought up was the Troubles.
Because we're so privileged in many ways that you can't really talk
brought
about.
up the Troubles and the fight would break out.
Yeah.
It was much more existential than that.
Yeah.
And so there was a whole range of things you just never mentioned. You'd never mentioned the PLO or Palestine. Now, PLO at the time was the equivalent of Al-Qaeda.
Wow.
They'd only murdered the Israeli Olympic team in 1972. So in 1976,
which Spielberg made a movie about,
yes,
right? Munich. Wow.
So all that stuff was going down. So the 70s at the time was this dark, grim, depressing time. New York City was a hellhole, and not because
filled with crime
and falling to bits. So you see all those gritty New York police dramas and stuff, and the early Scorsese films. It looks like a nightmare because it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the 80s and Reagan that they decided, let's have a party, and it all ended. And Star Wars turned up, and they decided, let's make kids films instead of adult films, because all the adult films are a bit dour and depressing. So for the next 15, 20 years, they just made kid films.
Yeah, well, I think now even New York, now that all the lockdowns and stuff are happening because of the pandemic, the crime rate has been absolutely exponentially increasing.
They've had a bit of a backlash to that stuff, but overall the crime's been going down.
Oh, as in total?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they attributed that to lead levels and fuel, I think.
People going crazy over the lead levels.
Oh, yeah, but just poisoning people and damaging mental capacity and stuff. Yeah, it's quite crazy.
Like fluoride in the water type shit?
No, that's something else again. That's a 50s conspiracy theory.
Wow.
Way before the internet or even television or VHS for that matter.
Do they still put, can you search yourself for a second? Do they still put fluoride in the water?
They sure do.
I bet you they do, yeah.
That's why you got good teeth.
Yes, and a tiny pineal gland.
No. In fact, if you want to see the first example of that conspiracy theory being aired, go and watch Dr. Strangelove by...
Dr. Strangelove?
Dr. Strangelove by Kubrick.
Kubrick.
That's a classic. That's one of the first of the anti-nuke films, I guess you could say.
Wow.
My dad used to work in the Water Authority. He used to put fluoridation into this.
From the government. I love that. Helps to rebuild and strengthen the teeth.
That's right. It's
while we take over society.
It's what's called public. It's what's called, same reason they put chlorine in it to kill germs. It's called public safety and health. Right. Anyway, Dr. Strangelove, one of the base commanders, goes bonkers and sets a nuclear mission off to Russia to blow up the world. And he does it because, he couldn't perform one day with sex, and he realized that fluoridation was a real thing. Conspiracy theory.
Wow.
So he goes off and ends the world.
So the excuse is because it's for teeth, right?
Yeah.
Right. They put other shit in water, don't they?
Oh, they put all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, there's heaps of stuff. People think they're actually drinking clean water. It's not.
You are cleaned water. You're also treated water.
Treated.
You're getting treated, filtered water. So the chlorine is there to stop you from getting botulism and all kinds of bugs, and the fluoride's there for value adding, really.
Wow.
It's certainly not controlling your brain or anything, because here we are talking about it.
Well, who knows? Do you believe that the CIA killed JFK?
I think.
Have you seen Oliver Stone's film?
No, Oliver Stone is an ex-Vietnam vet and the classic middle American, I call it conspiracy theorist, but that was like common middle American mythologies. Conspiracy theories used to be a left-wing thing once.
Wow.
Nixon, Watergate, Vietnam War, right? Most of that turned out to be true.
The large majority of it, yeah.
Right? Which is why there were so many conspiracy theories about it. It gets dragged out into the open and thought, aha, Now it's like most of it's the domain of the right, and it's just in fucking
with QAnon and all that sort of stuff.
It's just, and really it's just, some of that stuff is just an extension of the old rock and roll is the Satan's music, which first appeared in a big way in the 80s. And that appeared in a big way in the 80s because the evangelical vote got mobilized by Reagan for the first time. Up to that point, the evangelicals stayed well away from politics because they quite correctly pointed out it was quite corrupt. And getting involved with it would only lead to bad things and demean our faith and our church. And I'm thinking, you got that straight. Jeez.
So are you an Oliver Stone fan?
Not really.
Not really?
He was a bit mainstream. I mean, I like some of his films, but I was never into him.
Oh, okay.
It was just he was just one of the characters of the 80s and 90s, really.
Wow.
So, what you'd call mainstream.
Yeah, because he's still got he's still pretty active in the voicing of like pretty, you can call them outrageous, but there's quite a bit of validity to them. Some of these really wild conspiracy theories.
For sure.
Yeah.
You'll find conspiracy theories live in places like the West and the Middle East, partly because of all the chicanery that's gone down over the years. I think with JFK, I think there was an old-fashioned gun accident. Certainly Lee Harvey Oswald was trying to take a few pot shots, but the magic
So you
bullet
think
that bounced around, I
and
think,
traveled
was,
through different exit wounds.
and I think what happened there is that the guy with the AR-15 tripped over something and accidentally took the back of the president's head off. Like, it was an old-fashioned, gun accident,
Right.
which they kept hidden because back
So
in the 60s, the Secret Service was holier than the Pope.
So you don't. So you reckon Lee Harvey Oswald took a shot, but there was another.
He'd definitely take
but there
some
was
shots.
another
He
shot.
was a U.S. Marine, so he didn't know
Yeah.
how to shoot straight.
And like he had been like he was tied in with the Russians at some point as well.
Probably. There was a lot of people who were very sympathetic with that. And a lot of that would have come down to the politics of the Cold War.
Yeah. One thing I actually think you would find really interesting, there's a really famous photo of Lee Harvey Oswald, which the media circulated at one point in time when all the theories and stuff were going about with him being the shooter when they arrested him and everything. And apparently it's doctored. He's holding a
for
gun.
Sure. It'll be an old-fashioned newspaper photo that's started up for the day. Yeah, for
and
sure.
they've somehow, before Photoshop was a thing, they managed to put his face on a body.
Most photos are manipulated.
Wow.
And I don't mean like, they've used Photoshop on it. I mean, they just do things like grade and crop and do stuff like that because they've got a deadline. They've got to get something out in a hurry.
Could you look this up, Leo? A doctored Lee Harvey Oswald photo?
Yeah. But the point is,
Yeah.
the fact that it's doctored or not is sort of beside the point, really. I mean, most photos are framed. In fact, when you're taking like 50 photos or 100 photos at a press conference, they're carefully cherry picking the ones they want to show.
To convey a particular message.
This is old news. This is like media studies 101, really. It's just like if you've got an editor,
Let's go to images
or a policy that you're
this photo here.
That wouldn't surprise me. And frankly, it doesn't really change the outcome.
Yeah, this one on the left. Yeah. So apparently they pulled some random photo of some guy holding a gun and managed to because if you look at the way in which the shadows are pointing and you look at his neckline, I mean like I'm no expert, but people are saying that that's some fake ass shit right there.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But whether he did it or not, I don't think it was necessarily what ended up happening.
Yeah.
I think what happened was something else, and it was just the opacity of the times where people had gentlemen's agreements not to say this or that, and then
old school.
And then suddenly the wheels come off, and then suddenly it all breaks and all hell breaks loose. It's like the whole UFO thing, the flying saucer stuff, I should say.
Are you a believer?
No.
Really?
Sorry.
I'm a fucking believer.
No, I'm
Believer in
UFOs.
Oh yeah,
I believe in UFOs. I don't believe in flying saucers.
No, right.
I've seen a UFO.
It's unidentified, it flies,
Flying
and it's an object.
Okay,
So,
okay,
it's a
I
UFO.
understand what
I
you're
don't know
saying.
what it is.
Okay.
So I can believe in that.
So you
It's a
believe, but
description.
you believe in extraterrestrial life?
I'm sure there's extraterrestrial life out there. I'm just not sure if
But
it's
you don't
ever
think the
visited
American
us.
government's in cahoots with them?
No, the way
They
I
lack
see
the
it,
wit. They lack the wit. All these conspiracy theories have clearly never had to project manage anything.
Yeah, you have
'Cause
to
if
make
they
a lot of
had-
assumptions for people to believe.
If you had,
Yeah.
you'd know, trying to get 5 students to bloody coordinate in a single straight line is near impossible.
And when
Trying
you're
to
talking about
imagine
hundreds
that,
of people trying to keep
Correct.
secrets, it's pretty
it
unlikely.
would be pretty obvious by now.
But it doesn't mean to say that we aren't being visited.
It wouldn't surprise me if we were. I mean, it'd be a bit of, there's knowing intellectually and then getting the emotional shock of such news, having gone through many tragedies and disasters myself. But, it's, did little bipeds with technological implements come and visit us? I don't know about that.
What was that?
I'm open to the possibility, but
What was that
nothing I've seen
movie,
yet has ever come close to deciding it.
I forgot what it's called. It's a really famous alien movie. They all come out of their ship. It's like all very, very B grade.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
No, it's
No.
like
That's A grade.
for something from Mars.
Invaders from Mars.
Invaders from Mars. Yeah,
See, that's
You a
Cold
fan
War
of that?
stuff as well.
you a fan of that film?
Yes and no. I mean, I've kind of grown out of it a little. I mean, it was sort of cute and twee when I was a kid, and then it just got more and more 50s and out of date.
Cheesy.
Yeah, and I went beyond cheesy and like, I just don't have time for this nonsense.
Yeah.
It's like watching some of those great old dramas where like, you watch this. To Kill a Mockingbird or something like that. It's all about this disaffected academic. Oh, my life is miserable, and I'm waiting for this film to start. It's like, come on, when's this drama going to start? And then I realize, that's the gimmick.
Yeah.
He's an intellectual and he's having a bad life. Like, what? I feel gypped. It's like that was given. But no, that's the big radical thing back in 1952 when such things didn't exist.
Did you work on any? Have you worked on any sci-fi sort of alien films?
Yeah, I've done bits and pieces. So I did some storyboarding on God, what was it? What's that Van Diesel film with the Dark Planet?
Oh,
The first of the
I know what you're talking about. I don't know the name of the film though.
it's a genre flick. We did a bit of pre-production work with that.
Riddick.
Yeah, well, Riddick, I think.
Riddick, yeah.
Not the Chronicles of Riddick, but the one before.
Oh, but there's been like a few sequels.
They crash land on a planet and they've got this nocturnal creature that they've got a planet with like 5 suns or 3 suns, and then they have one dark night, and then all these things come out and start eating people, and it's kind of flying crazy pterodactyl things. So I got to do some storyboarding for some of the opening sequences on that. But that was just a bit of pre-production and a pitch. It didn't go anywhere. That's about as close as I've got.
Wow.
I think Animal picked up Farscape. So I did a few scribbles for that, but nothing, I hardly call it involvement.
Okay. Yeah, storyboarding. Leah was, I think last podcast we were doing was talking about the importance of storyboarding in terms of putting together like a film that actually, or a short clip that makes sense.
It's a really good pre-production tool. So if you're a Wim Wenders fan, you would spit on storyboards and never want to go near them. But storyboards are useful for, especially if you're doing anything that requires animation or sometimes visual effects, because you can sort of edit your final film and keep your animation to a minimum. You know, it's the old Roger Corman thing where you can't afford to make too many dumb decisions on the day. You've got to have it all worked out. So that's when they get really useful. But some people use them just to get their heads thinking about stuff. And then when they actually go to shoot the thing, they've already thought it through because they worked it all out with storyboards, and then go off and do something completely different on the set on the day.
Wow, okay.
Because what they're doing there, they're thinking through it as they're kind of coming up with it. They're not trying to literally define it. But that's more live action than visual animation.
Yeah, wow. Have you seen the movie Argo with Ben Affleck when they have the storyboards and they try to, I think it's, I
don't think I have, no.
I forgot, I think it might be Iran. Where they where they go in to save the expats from the CIA or the embassy.
Slightly exaggerated, but
no doubt. But they use the storyboards to convince the guards that they're actually a legit film company and stuff. Fucking great movie
for sure. It's a good yarn.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I think we might have to wrap this up. We've been going a while. Got into some conspiracy theories.
Dear. Like I say, pick a finite subject. Otherwise, I'll be here all night.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay.
Is there anything you want to pitch that you're doing at the moment?
Well, our courses are the best in the universe, and you
which
should all
is
come
at
and do
TAFE.
Yep, TAFE Journal Up. You should all come
Journal
out.
Up.
I'm also a committee member of Wanimate, which is a little animation industry body, I suppose, or a little animation group. And we're often doing things there, so you can check us out on Facebook.
I plan on having Tanya on so she can just promote that.
Oh, well, yeah, she's the chairman of Wanimate. I'm the treasurer at the moment.
So. And also the remaster of the Magic Portal.
If I ever get that finished.
Because I'm sure there are some fucking diehard Magic Portal fans out there.
What I might do is put out a little preview of things to come, I think.
I'm excited to say that would be fucking cool, man.
Yeah.
But
so it's at 2K at the moment, but it's very, very grainy, shall we say.
Very grainy. 2K is like reso.
Yeah,
resolution. Wow. Okay. But yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay, for coming
Anytime.
on. I appreciate it so much.
But yeah, I think you need a specific topic, and then I'll just focus on that.
Yeah, cool.
Excellent.